Hello and welcome to this podcast about famous people who met a tragic end, unfortunately. You're going to hear about people who, for the most part, fought for justice, equality and peace, but who had their lives cut short by senseless acts of violence. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hello, and if you're a new listener to the podcast, you're very, very welcome. And if you've come back to listen again, thank you. With over 50 years of teaching English between us, we're going to help you improve your English and take it up to the next level. Hello, Reza. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm feeling fine. Looking forward to recording this podcast because it's a very interesting topic. Perhaps it will surprise some listeners, but we hope you'll learn some English from listening to it.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to podcasting again with you. The best part of my week, actually the best part of my month, is doing these podcasts with you. And today we're talking about assassinations. Most of the people on this list you will have heard of, but maybe not so sure about the details of how they actually died. Who's first on the list, Reza?
We start off with a very, very well-known personality, and most people know that he was assassinated. We're talking about the great Martin Luther King Jr. Sometimes people don't add the bit junior, but his father was senior. Martin Luther King Jr., who, of course, was the American civil rights leader and activist who was assassinated in 1968. By the way, in his life, he was arrested 30 times.
I did not know that. So that's one thing I've learned. Another thing I've learned, because one of his famous speeches, the I Have a Dream speech, was kind of improvised. He was giving a speech, and about halfway, somebody in the audience, a gospel singer called Mahalia Jackson, she shouted, "Hey Martin, tell them about the dream." And this prompted Dr. King to pivot to a sermon that he'd previously delivered in church, because he was a church minister, and he described a version of the American dream that was equal to everybody and accessible to all citizens. And do you remember part of the speech, Reza?
I certainly do. Like many people, part of the speech goes, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today," Dr. King said.
Wonderful words and very, very memorable. And after his assassination, 6 years after, on the 30th of June 1974, a man shot and killed his mother, Alberta Williams King, while she was playing the organ in church at Ebenezer Baptist Church. So incredibly, his mother was also shot by a 23-year-old man in similar circumstances, although maybe it might have been a random killing.
And do you know what Martin Luther King Sr., Alberta Williams' husband, said after his wife was shot?
What did he say?
Years after his son had been shot, he said, "I can't hate any man. I forgive the people who shot both of them." That's the bit that really gets me. Wow. Your son was assassinated. Your wife was assassinated, but you say, "I forgive everyone. I can't hate any man." Wow, that's the bit that blows my mind.
Yeah, unbelievable. What a family. Moving on to another part of the world, let's go over to India, where the famous Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, he was the leader of the Indian independence movement. The British had control of India before 1948, and that was the year in which Gandhi was assassinated. He was the leader of India's independence movement against the British, and he promoted non-violent and peaceful resistance. What do we know about his assassin?
Well, ironically, everybody knows that Gandhi was an Indian, and like the majority of Indians, a Hindu by religion. Gandhi made a big effort to make sure, or to try and make sure, that all the different religions in India could get along together. The three big religions are Hinduism, Islam, Muslims, and Buddhism, but there are others as well. And he made a big effort, and it ended up being the cause of his assassination because a Hindu extremist, angered at Gandhi's tolerance of Muslims, shot him. So someone of his own religion assassinated him because he thought basically that he was being too tolerant of Muslims and he should have been tougher on them, and that's why he killed Gandhi.
And we're going to hear later of a similar assassination from an extremist from the same religion. So there's a pattern that emerges a bit later. But one of Gandhi's famous quotes, one I like very much, because he was really a symbol for peaceful resistance, that's what he promoted. He said, "In a gentle way, you can shake the world." I really like that.
You've just reminded me of another famous anecdote of Gandhi. I can't tell you the exact words he used, but it's not important. There was a lot of religious sectarian violence going on as India was being made independent from the British. And there was sadly, a lot of killing because of religious intolerance. And this Hindu family had had their small child, or even perhaps a baby, murdered by Muslim extremists. And they approached Gandhi and said, "What can we do? We don't know what to do. This is terrible. How can our life go on? Our child has been murdered by these Muslim extremists." And Gandhi said, "Adopt the child and make sure it's a Muslim." Wow, mind-blowing. Adopt a Muslim baby. That was his advice. Wow,
Yeah,
that blows my mind.
Tolerance personified, I think. Unbelievable. Another famous Gandhi, although not related to Mahatma Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, was India's first female prime minister, aka the Iron Lady of India, aka that abbreviation stands for also known as. So Margaret Thatcher, aka the Iron Lady of British politics, and Indira Gandhi, aka the Iron Lady of India. What do we know about her? I was surprised to hear that she wasn't necessarily a good person.
Well, she's a controversial figure. The surname was a coincidence, no relation to Mahatma Gandhi, but she was the daughter of a very famous person, Jawaharlal Nehru. Nehru did know Gandhi, was a companion of Gandhi's, and helped get independence along with Gandhi from the British. And he was India's first prime minister. But religious problems again soon got in the way. This was much, much later. In the 1980s, she was assassinated by two of her own Sikh bodyguards. Now, we've spoken of the Buddhists, the Hindus, the Muslims. In India, there's also another very important religion, Sikh. That's spelled S-I-K-H.
The Sikhs are the people who wear the turbans, the white turbans on their head, and they grow their hair very long.
They don't have to be white, necessarily. They can be a different color. Yes, so in strict Sikh religion, men don't cut their hair or beards. Now, in reality, these days, a lot of them do. That's an interesting one, isn't it? So women can show their hair in public, but not men. Men must cover their hair in public. It's the reverse.
The opposite of Muslims.
Yeah, strange that, isn't it? So she had Sikh bodyguards. And by the way, it's a bit of a cliche, but Sikhs often are bodyguards. There's a kind of tradition, or there was a tradition of India, of Sikhs being in the army and the military and that type of thing. The British made good use of the Sikhs' great military knowledge. They're well known as good soldiers. So she had Sikh bodyguards, and in revenge for the violence that had occurred in the most holy of holy places for the Sikhs, the Golden Temple in Amritsar, where the army and the devotees, people devoted to the religion, they had a kind of battle. The army ended up having to go in and started shooting people and bombing and all sorts of things. And obviously this angered a lot of Sikhs. So her bodyguards were Sikhs. And a few months later, in revenge for that, they actually killed her. So her own employees assassinated her.
Before we continue with this week's podcast, we just want to let you know that you can now improve your English with both of us personally. That's not at the same time, but we both will help you in different ways to improve your English. With me, you can join one of my conversation courses, and that means you'll be in a small group of lovely students, and together we will have discussions and debates and role plays and lots of different activities that are all designed to help you improve your fluency and your confidence when you're speaking English. And for more information, just send me an email, Craig, Craig, at inglespodcast.com. And Reza, you also offer classes online, correct?
That's right. But my focus or speciality is more with one-to-one, with individuals. So if you'd like a one-to-one individual class to focus on your particular needs, you could get in touch with me. Just send me an email to belfastreza@gmail.com.
And now let's get back to the podcast. Let's leave India and go back to where we started, back to the USA. And John F. Kennedy, the President of the United States, was assassinated in the year I was born, in 1963. I don't remember his assassination. I was quite small at the time, but he was the 35th and the youngest president to be elected at the age of 43. He was very well known for his charisma and charm and his inspiring speeches. And his administration was in power during the Cuban Missile Crisis and also at the beginning of the Vietnam War. Now, those are facts, but it's amazing to me that he's so well thought of in the public eye, and his assassination caused these shockwaves in the US. It really was a shock that such a charismatic person was assassinated. But curiously, he was in power at the time when strange things were going on. The Vietnam War and the Cuban Missile Crisis that nearly led to a nuclear war. What's your opinion on that?
Yes, it was, what can I say? It was a very tumultuous time in history. He just happened to be the guy in power. It was a very revolutionary time as well, of course, for Europe and the West, the United States. The 1960s was a time of great social change. He just happened to be the guy in charge at the time, I guess. I think that the Cuban Missile Crisis would have happened anyway, whether it was Kennedy in power or not. So I wouldn't give him the blame for that. It was going to happen. It was inevitable. It was the height of the Cold War.
So maybe he was pushed into it by the CIA. I think Hoover was still around at that time.
Oh, who do you mean by Hoover? Not the vacuum cleaner.
No, the guy who led the witch hunt against communism. I think he was instrumental in starting the Vietnam War. But we're going off the point a little bit. Curiously, the man accused of assassinating Kennedy was himself murdered before his trial. So, FBI conspiracy theory, perhaps? Is there something there that the assassin was himself murdered to cover up any possible leaks in the story? I don't know. Maybe we'll leave that open.
Nobody knows is the right answer, but personally I find it impossible to believe it's a coincidence.
Me too.
Completely impossible. Before he went on trial. So it wasn't like he'd had a trial and didn't say much and they killed him. No. He was put out of action before he could say anything or implicate anyone. Highly suspicious, to say the least.
Very suspicious. Now, Kennedy had a younger brother, Robert F. Kennedy. He was a senator, very involved in politics. He was also a civil rights activist, like Martin Luther King. And he was also assassinated in 1968, 5 years after his older brother. He was a candidate for the presidency at the time. Again, very suspicious. Were there people around that didn't want another Kennedy in power? He was also the first Attorney General, which is the prosecutor, the highest position of the prosecutor, the legal prosecutor in the US, and the first one to take on the mafia. To take on means to accept the responsibility of fighting the mafia and organized crime, as well as supporting the civil rights movement.
So I think we can conclude that there certainly were a lot of powerful people who would have wanted him to disappear. Who killed him? Don't know, but a lot of people would have been very happy at the results. But I like to think, I'm an optimist, that many more people were saddened by his death.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's stay with American presidents and go back in time even further to the 16th president of the United States back in 1861 to 1865, Abraham Lincoln. Who hasn't heard of Abe Lincoln? He was the 16th president of the United States from 1861 and assassinated, of course, in 1865, Abraham Lincoln. And he led the country through the Civil War between the North and the South. And he also ended slavery, although I don't know if you know this, Reza, didn't he have slaves himself, Abraham Lincoln? I know he ended slavery, but I think he also had slaves.
He did, I think, before it was ended, and then after that they became servants, then paid. But yeah, I think he did have slaves. I don't know much about his assassination, except one detail. I do know that he was shot in a theater, isn't that right?
Yes, he was shot in a theater, yeah.
I guess he didn't get to see the end of the play.
No, he didn't find out who done it. Let's go to Egypt now. Let's go over to the Middle East for a while and talk about Anwar Sadat. Who was he, Reza?
Yes, Anwar Sadat from Egypt, the Middle East. Good place if you want to talk about assassinations. They've had a few. He was the president of Egypt who was assassinated in 1981. And he was known for his efforts to modernize Egypt's economy and its politics. Not sure how successful he was about modernizing the politics, but he did try. And he played a key role in negotiating the famous Camp David Accords.
What does that mean, a key role?
A key role, key means absolutely fundamental. Like you're the key or one of the keys that opens the door. A key role. The Camp David Accords were the agreements between Egypt and Israel to look for a peace treaty. So Sadat was key in that role.
And staying in the Middle East, Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, he was Prime Minister twice, from 1974 to 77, and 1992 until, unfortunately, he was assassinated in 1995. Now, he was also a key figure, a main figure in Israeli-Palestinian politics and the peace process. He wanted to make peace, and he wanted a two-state solution, a state for Israel and a state for Palestine. In fact, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1994, together with the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat and the Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres. Those three got together and made efforts to negotiate peace in the Middle East. Although, unfortunately, here we come back to extremism, religious extremism, because he was assassinated by a Jewish extremist on November the 4th, 1995, similar to Gandhi's assassin. And coincidentally, it was at a peace rally in Tel Aviv, the capital of Israel, where Rabin was assassinated by somebody of his own religion.
I said earlier that in the Middle East, they've seen one or two assassinations, to say the least, although they're not the only part of the world. But it goes much deeper than that. As a little anecdote, the very word assassin comes from Egypt. Did you know that?
It rings a bell, but remind me?
Think about it. In most languages, most European languages, it's similar. Spanish, French, they're all fairly similar. It comes from a word more or less hashashi, or something like that. Those who smoke hashish.
Really?
Yes. In ancient Egypt, there was a group of people who were assassins, murderers, but the word hadn't been invented. And to steady their nerves, they smoked a lot of dope. They smoked a lot of hash or hashish.
So you didn't have to be stoned on hashish to kill someone, but it helped.
It helped, or maybe to make your conscience feel better afterwards. So these people in Egypt smoked a lot of dope and killed people for money. And that is where we get the word assassin. It's connected to the word hashish. The word assassin is connected to the word for marijuana, incredibly.
Interesting.
And it goes back to Egypt.
And to be clear, the difference between an assassin and a murderer is an assassin tends to kill somebody who is more important or famous or relevant to society, whereas you can murder anybody. So to murder is to kill someone, but to assassinate is to kill somebody of importance. Who's next on the list, Reza?
Well, going back to an area that we've already been to, where they've had quite a few assassinations as well as the Middle East, back to the Indian subcontinent.
Where there's a lot of hashish, by the way.
Yeah, by the way. So we've already spoken about Mahatma Gandhi and Indira Gandhi. Now Pakistan, which of course used to be part of India when the British were there, Benazir Bhutto. She was Prime Minister of Pakistan from 1988 to 1990, and then again from 1993 to 1996. She was the first woman to lead a Muslim-majority country, and she was known for promoting democracy and women's rights. Not easy in a country like Pakistan. Well, she was accused of corruption. She wasn't 100% clean, let's say, but no politician in Pakistan has ever been.
In Pakistan?
Yeah. And she spent several years in self-imposed exile. So they didn't oblige her to live abroad, but she thought it was wise considering they probably would have put her in prison if she had lived in the country. But she did return to Pakistan in 2007 to participate in the general elections. And she was assassinated, this time not by gunshot, but in a suicide bombing attack. So in 2007, while she was campaigning to try and be prime minister again, that is when she got bombed, when she got assassinated. And by the way, her father had also been killed. We can't use the word assassinated. He was executed in one of the many coups d'etats, or we could just say coup, C-O-U-P, that have happened in Pakistan when General Zia al-Haq overthrew her father and, surprise, surprise, had a trial, invented some charge, and then executed him and established the army as the new leading power. So her father had been executed, and then she was assassinated.
Yeah, it's basically removing the opposition, taking the opposition off of the board so that you can keep power or gain power. Now, some of you may have seen a very good film with Sean Penn playing the role of Harvey Milk. Now, who was Harvey Milk? Well, if you haven't seen the film, and you haven't heard of Harvey Milk, he was an activist for the LGBTQ plus community, one of the first openly gay officials who was elected in the United States. And he was very well known for his advocacy for equal rights and social justice. Advocacy is the noun, to advocate is the verb. So he strongly advocated for equal rights, social justice, especially for the LGBTQ plus and the gay community. He was assassinated back in 1978.
And the last famous person we have for you today who was assassinated, I'm sure needs very little introduction, certainly for anybody of over 30 years of old, but probably for people under 30 years as well. We're talking about John Lennon. John Lennon, of course, one of the Beatles, that famous group from Liverpool, which existed until 1970. Then the group broke up and they went their separate ways, and they recorded as solo artists and did other things. And John Lennon was assassinated on December the 8th, 1980, so 10 years after the Beatles had split. And it happened outside his apartment building in New York City. But his message of peace and love, which he spoke about in his music, but also when he wasn't performing, hopefully that lives on to this day and still continues to inspire generations of fans. I meet 15, 16, 20-year-olds who say they like Beatles songs, even today. So clearly he's had a lasting impact. Craig, do you know anything about why he was assassinated? What did he do to deserve such a horrible death?
I think the person who assassinated him, and we don't want to publicize the person's name, why give that person any sort of fame or recognition, but I think it had something to do with hypocrisy. He thought that John Lennon was preaching equal rights, and he had a lot of money. He was living in this very expensive apartment in New York, so they thought he was a little bit hypocritical. And I think there was another reason as well, but I can't quite remember.
Was the assassin some kind of mixed up religious fanatic? Wasn't there a comment that John Lennon had said about the Beatles are bigger than God? He said it as a kind of joke.
Yes, or bigger than Jesus. That's right. Yeah.
This crazy guy took offense at that. He took it literally. He thought John Lennon was saying it seriously, which he wasn't.
He joked around a lot, and I think it was taken out of context and taken too seriously. A famous British comedian speaking to Americans, North Americans, said, you gave us McDonald's, Taco Bell, Coca-Cola, and Donald Trump. We gave you John Lennon and you shot him. Not my words, don't shoot the messenger. But now it's your turn to practice your English. Is there anyone not on our list who you think should be? Famous people assassinated? Let us know. We'd love to know what you think. And also if you have ideas for future episodes, because we're running a bit low on episode ideas, so your thoughts are always welcome. You can send us a voice message, which we prefer. Go to speakpipe.com, speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast. Where can people send their emails, Reza, if they prefer that?
You could write to us. You could send it to craig@inglespodcast.com or belfastreza@gmail.com.
And we remind you that this podcast is sponsored in part by mentioningles.com. If you're looking for a paid course to help you with your English, why not visit the online store? You'll find that at store.mentioningles.net.
As always, we'd like to say a big thank you to those people who support the podcast by voluntarily donating money through the Patreon scheme. Patreon, that's Patreon. And through that scheme, you can donate as little as $1.50 per month. And as a thank you to people who donate that money, we give them instant access to recent audio transcriptions. If you might be interested, why not follow the link in the show notes? Patreon.com/English podcast.
And before we go out the door this week, we'd like to say a special thank you to our most recent Patreon supporters. And they are Paul Romero Ruiz, Fatima, Annie, Ezekiel Zubel, Ruby, and special thanks to Juan Carlos Rodado, who has recently increased the amount of his Patreon
donation. Thank you to you and to everybody.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends so that more people can listen. There will be an episode next week, but we're not sure yet about what. Have a wonderful week. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's bye-bye from me.
Music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.